They say you can only truly know someone once you've seen them fall apart, when the mask slips, when the lies dry out, when love turns sour and starts to stink like meat left in a sun-warmed car, and I suppose that's fair, because I didn't know what she really was, not when I met her, not when I proposed, not even when I first noticed how her eyes wouldn't close all the way when she slept. Like she was watching me from underneath her eyelids just in case I started to remember what I'd forgotten. We met at a grief support group, which sounds like the kind of place a serial killer might go fishing for prey, but I was the one grieving back then, and she, well, that's the part I'm still trying to figure out, because she never once said who she lost, only that he was hollow inside and full of teeth, and I laughed, because I thought she meant he was some kind of cruel, sarcastic bastard, like the sort of men grief tends to make of all of us, but now I know she wasn't joking. Not even a little. We fell in fast, like a drunk stumbling into traffic. Married 6 months after meeting. Moved into her grandmother's old farmhouse a month after that. I hadn't even seen the basement when I said yes. Hadn't opened the cellar door once. Hadn't asked why the padlock on it looked new, why it shivered every time I touched it, or why the dog went fucking feral any time I got near it. I didn't ask. Because I was in love. Because she was soft, and strange, and smelled like dirt and roses. Because she touched me like I was something sacred. Because her eyes were the color of winter rain, and she laughed in her sleep. I ignored the things that didn't make sense, the scratches on the attic ceiling, the piles of shed skin under the bed, the fact that she never ate meat unless it was raw. Until one night, I don't even know what month it was anymore, because the clocks had stopped and so had the birds. I woke up to a noise in the hallway that didn't sound human. It sounded like someone dragging wet sacks of bones across the floor. And when I opened the bedroom door, I saw her crawling, not walking, crawling, knees bent backwards like a broken spider, mouth unhinged wide enough to swallow a lantern, and in her chest, where her ribs should have hidden her heart, I saw light. Flickering. Strobing. As if something alive was trying to shine through. She didn't stop. Didn't speak. She just smiled and scuttled into the bathroom and locked the door behind her. And the next morning, she made pancakes. No explanation. No blood. No apology. Just eggs, syrup, and a smile that didn't quite reach her face. That was the morning I realized 2 things. 1, my wife was not human. 2, she was keeping something in the basement. I started listening more carefully at night after that. Listening for the wet dragging sound. Listening for the whispers that came from the floorboards. Listening to the house. And one night, the house whispered back. It said, "She brought you here to feed it." I've been hearing that same sentence every night since. I think I married the wrong woman. But I think it's too late to leave. Because the door's locked from the outside now. Because she hums to something in the basement every night. Because I saw teeth in the walls yesterday. And because something has started moving inside of me. I'm not sure if it's love anymore. But I know it's growing. And I think it has her face. I started noticing the others a few weeks after the wedding, neighbors, or things pretending to be neighbors, all of them with 2 wide smiles, long-sleeved shirts even in July, and eyes like cloudy glass marbles, as if someone had scooped out whatever made them human and filled the sockets with dead things that knew how to watch but not see. And it occurred to me, in that slow, sinking way nightmares do, that maybe she hadn't just married me to feed it, but to isolate me, to dig a moat around my life and fill it with grinning monsters who all knew their lines better than I did. There's a woman across the street who never blinks, not once, not even when she's outside watering her hydrangeas in the rain, and every time I step out to grab the mail, she turns her head exactly 45 degrees and whispers, "You chose her. You said yes." And the mailman, don't get me started on the mailman, he always wears gloves, even in the heat, and I swear his fingers bend in the wrong direction when he waves, like his bones don't understand what hands are supposed to do. But worst of all is the child. There's this little girl who stands at the edge of our cornfield at exactly 3:15 a.m. Every night, wearing a yellow dress and no shoes, her head tilted just far enough that it looks like it should have snapped already, and sometimes she laughs, not like a child, but like something pretending to be a child, like a recording of a laugh played backward and warped with static, and the moment I look at her, the lights in our house flicker, and the thing in the basement begins to thump. It never used to thump. Now it does. Now it's getting impatient. I don't sleep anymore, not really. I just lie in bed beside her, listening to the bones in her neck shift as she breathes, watching her fingers twitch as though they're sewing something in her dreams, and I wonder if she knows that I know. If she can smell the fear leaking off of me like sour milk. Because I did look in the basement. Last Tuesday, when she left to go collect the marrow, whatever the hell that means, I broke the padlock and went down into the dark, and what I found wasn't a room, it was a mouth. A living, breathing, wet mouth carved into the stone, filled with stairs made of vertebrae, dripping walls that pulsed in rhythm to my heartbeat, and a ceiling made of stretched skin etched with symbols that moved when I wasn't looking directly at them. There was flesh growing down there. Warm, veiny, wriggling. Like the inside of something still digesting. And in the center of that fleshy void was a cage, suspended from the ceiling by ropes that weren't ropes, swaying in the dead air, and inside it was a man, what was left of a man, still alive, or close enough to it, his eyes wide, mouth sewn shut with copper wire, and all across his chest were puncture holes that pulsed with yellow light. She had fed him to it. Parts of him. Pieces, over time. And he looked at me. He looked at me like he'd been waiting. He mouthed 2 words behind the wire. "You're next." I don't know how I got back upstairs. Don't remember walking. Don't remember screaming. But I woke up in bed again, her breath on my neck, her hand on my chest, and her lips whispering, "I missed you last night. You weren't there when I called." And when I looked down at my chest, there was a fresh wound. Circular. Puckered. Still losing light. I think she's already started feeding me to it. I just don't know how many pieces are left. It was sometime between midnight and when the world stopped breathing that I realized the pain in my chest, the strange, raw weeping circle of meat she'd left behind. Wasn't healing the way it should have, wasn't scabbing over or clotting or tightening with time like wounds are supposed to, and instead it pulsed like a second heart, a foreign, undulating thing beating in reverse, and when I pressed my fingers to it in the bathroom mirror, I could feel something inside shifting, pressing back, something small and slick and squirming as though she'd planted a seed and the basement was its root and I was just the soil, just another husk for it to grow inside. I hadn't spoken a word aloud in days. I found that every time I tried, my throat locked up like I'd swallowed hair, and I could taste copper and teeth in my tongue's memory, but I still tried to scream when I saw the first tooth breaking the skin of the wound, poking out like a pearl embedded in rot, and I knew then that it wasn't a heart she'd given me, or a child, or even a curse. It was a mouth. Something new, and hungry, and mine. But the worst part wasn't that it had a tooth. It was that when I touched it, I could feel it bite back, and I'm not ashamed to say I cried, because when I looked up at the mirror, her reflection was already behind me, smiling, always wide-eyed and sleepless and lovely in a way that hurt, and she ran her fingers down my spine and whispered, "It's almost ready, love. Just one more harvest." She left me there, in the bathroom, naked and weeping and bleeding light, and went out into the cornfield, barefoot and humming, dragging a sack that screamed in short gasps, and though I couldn't see who it was, I knew from the sound that it was still alive, barely. And that whatever was inside the sack would be the next course in whatever horrific ceremonial feeding she had planned, something rhythmic and intentional, like a recipe passed down for generations through blood-soaked wedding nights and hand-sewn bone charms worn as veils. I followed her. I had to. Because the tooth in my chest was starting to itch, and the whispers in the corn were louder than usual, saying things like, "She found you under the black moon. She loves what you'll become. She chose your marrow for the bloom." And I think part of me, maybe the part she hadn't eaten yet, wanted to die before the rest of me was used up. I moved between the stalks, careful not to disturb the pattern she'd carved into the earth. A vast, spiral sigil of flattened corn and wriggling roots, pulsing like veins, all pointing toward the mouth of the barn which had long ago turned into something that was no longer a barn, but a womb, a throat, a temple to a thing I'd only seen once but could never forget, the rib cage made of chandeliers, the teeth like white-hot blades, the dozens of flayed hands sewn into its walls like wallpaper. She carried the sack into the barn, and I followed behind, shivering, leaking light from my chest, biting down on my own screams so they wouldn't hear me, they, the ones who lived in the hayloft, and hissed whenever flesh passed below them, and when I stepped inside, I saw her unravel the sack, and it was the neighbor girl, the child in the yellow dress from the field. And for a moment I felt horror, sharp and human and blinding, until I realized her eyes had too many pupils, and her mouth opened like a zipper across her jaw, and she laughed, and the barn laughed with her. It wasn't a girl. It was part of the ritual. A doll, stuffed with rotting breath and stitched with catgut, and the moment she was laid at the foot of the altar, yes, altar, I won't call it anything else now. It split open, like an overripe fruit, and the barn filled with the sound of bells and wet chewing, and I saw the roots of the house below us pulse and bloom and drink. The thing beneath the house was feeding again. And I was aroused. I don't know why. I wish I didn't feel that. But I did. And she turned to me, her hands dripping with the child's insides, her ribcage open to reveal that glowing light again, the same as what was now in my own wound, and she said, "One more harvest, love. Then we'll be together fully." Then she placed her palm over the tooth in my chest, and whispered a name I've never heard before. And it answered from under the earth. There's a moment that comes when your reflection no longer obeys you. Not like the common tricks of the light, not like paranoia or sleep deprivation or some residual twitch in the eyeballs after too many hours awake, but a deliberate act of betrayal, a defiance so subtle at first that you wonder if you're going mad, until the man in the mirror begins smiling before you do, begins licking his lips when yours are still sealed shut, and begins pressing his fingers into the mirror's inside like he's trying to tear his way out of you. And when I saw that bastard, myself, not myself, staring back at me with eyes like peeled eggs and gums full of sprouting teeth, I knew that whatever she'd sown into me had taken root. It had been 3 days, I think, maybe 4. Since the barn harvest, since the doll girl's stomach unzipped and something with bone wings and a face like a shriveled baby's fist slithered out and whispered in a language I didn't know but understood perfectly, and ever since then, I could feel it in my veins, in my nerves, in the slow silencing of my voice. It was using me, not just transforming my body, but overriding the very idea of me, like a parasite carving poetry into the soft wax of my brain. My wife, if I can still call her that. If the word still applies to something with no organs except the ones she collects. Began sleeping during the day now, curled up in a nest of old bridal veils and ropes made from human hair, twitching with dreams I was too afraid to enter, even though the mouth in my chest begged me to go to her, to crawl into the bed with her, to let her finish making me. But I resisted, at first, locking myself in the old toolshed behind the house with a rusted mirror and a flashlight, trying to pry the tooth wound open with pliers just to see how deep it went. And I should never have done that, Zoppy, because what came out of the wound wasn't blood or pus, but a tongue, a long, pink, meaty tongue with my own birthmark on it, licking the air blindly, tasting my breath, and when it coiled around my wrist I screamed so loud that I shat myself. I cut it off with the pliers. It screamed. I screamed louder. And that's when the thing in the mirror began to smile. Since then, I haven't been alone. Not really. He's always there now. The other me, the mirror me, the one with thinner skin and thicker lips, who mimics me like a bad actor learning his lines wrong on purpose, and sometimes when I blink too slow I can feel myself being pulled into him, like the space between glass and air is shrinking, like one of us will vanish and I'm not sure which one it'll be. But the worst was this morning. I woke up in the kitchen. I don't remember walking there. I was just there, standing at the sink, the faucet running, the knife block empty, and my fingers were wet, sticky, red, and when I turned around, I saw something skin nailed to the fridge, hung there like a child's art project, and it took me too long to recognize that it was me, or a version of me, hairless, eyeless, the flesh shaved thin in perfect sheets and arranged in petal patterns, and I screamed, I vomited. I slipped in the bile and cracked my chin on the counter. When I looked up again, it was gone. And she was standing there, in her wedding dress, now dripping with yolk-colored mucus, her veil crawling with tiny hands, like spider limbs made of baby bones, and she cradled my head and whispered, "You're almost right, my love. One more breath. Just one." Then she kissed me, and when she pulled away, she bit off a piece of my tongue, chewed it, and wept with joy. And the mirror laughed. Not me. The thing in the mirror. It laughed. And I think tonight's the wedding night again. Only this time, I'm the offering. The night air was thick with the copper stench of blood and something older, something rotted in the soil beneath the house, something that tasted like the sweet decay of promises broken long before the first vows were spoken. And I knew that no amount of begging or screaming or pleading would save me from what she had planned, for the tooth in my chest was no longer a tooth but a gnashing maw. The tongue that once bit back was now a serpent slithering beneath my ribs, whispering secrets I could barely comprehend but felt thrumming through my marrow like a death hymn. She appeared at the threshold of the barn, where the flickering candles cast warped shadows that crawled like insects across the floorboards, her dress soaked in something thick and red, her veil tangled with tiny bones that rattled like dried leaves in the cold wind, and her smile, oh, that smile, was a knife's edge, sharp enough to slice through the veil between life and whatever hell this was. She reached out and took my hand, her fingers ice-cold but pulsing with unnatural heat beneath the skin, and pulled me into the cavernous belly of that grotesque temple, where the walls were no longer wood but flesh stretched tight and pale, where chandeliers hung made from twisted ribs and dripping hearts, where the floor was slick with coagulated blood and writhing maggots, and the air was thick with the sound of slow chewing and wet sucking, as if the house itself was alive and feeding. I stumbled forward, the wound in my chest throbbing in time with my ragged heartbeat, the teeth inside grinding like millstones, and I could feel it, her harvest, my end, the ritual's final act, drawing near, as she whispered in a voice like cracking bones, "These are my vows, love, carved into your flesh and written in blood. Tonight, we are one." At the altar, there lay the bodies, no, not bodies, but blank canvases. Stripped and skinned, faces frozen in silent screams, eyes gouged and replaced with polished stones that glinted with a sick, unholy light, and across their chests were sewn the petals of the teeth that now bloomed in me, a grotesque bouquet of flesh and bone, a harvest of souls and marrow that fed the thing growing inside. She began to chant, her voice rising like a dirge, a song of birth and death and endless feeding, and the thing inside me surged, the mouth ripping wider beneath my skin, biting into my ribs, tearing flesh, gnawing at my very soul, and I knew with horrifying clarity that this was no longer a ritual to join us, but a consumption. I tried to fight it, to wrench the teeth from my chest, to tear the serpent from my throat, but she was too strong, and the house was alive with a hungry hunger, the walls pulsing with every heartbeat, every scream, every sacrifice made in this cursed place, and as the teeth opened their maw and the serpent's tongue licked the last of my sanity away, I understood what I was. I was the feast. I was the harvest. And if you ever come across a house where the corn whispers your name, where the shadows move just beyond the edge of your vision, where the wedding dress hangs stained with something too red to be old wine, then listen to this warning: do not follow the lights in her ribcage. Because if you do, you will become the teeth in her smile, and she will never stop feeding.